Nortons are getting a new television set, and I was just thinking, why don't we get one too?
All right, Alice. I am now going out the door again. When I come back in, act like I wasn't in here before.
As a matter of fact, we were both, I hate to say how, and then we did summer stock together, the show off, and along Fifth Avenue on Broadway.
The Honeymooners was a television giant and unstoppable force in the golden age of TV that pulled in millions of viewers every single week.
Finally, they put up the Honeymooners set, and he just called us out at the theater in our own clothes. No props, no costumes. It was just pure, solid, truthful humor, and I think that explains why it lasted so long.
Jackie Gleason was a king, and his show was the crown jewel. But one single scene, one moment that went too far, sent shockwaves through the studio and the audience at home. This wasn't just a controversial line, it was a moment so deeply unsettling it put a nail in the coffin of the most popular show in America. We're going to reveal the scene, the fallout, and the secret reason the show was never the same again. America's favorite show. America's darkest secret. It's funny when you think about it, but in the 1950s, television was like the Wild West. There were 3 networks, a handful of channels, and if a show was a hit, it wasn't just a hit, it was a national event. And in that world, Jackie Gleason was bigger than a king. He was an emperor. His variety show, The Jackie Gleason Show, was appointment television for a staggering 40 million Americans every Saturday night. To put that in perspective, that's more people than watch the top 5 most popular shows today combined. The show was a ratings machine, and Gleason had just signed the biggest television deal in history, worth $11 million, which is over $100 million in today's money. He was untouchable. The most popular part of his show was a series of sketches about a loudmouth bus driver from Brooklyn, Ralph Cramden, and his long-suffering wife, Alice. People couldn't get enough of it. So in 1955, the network decided to spin it off into its own standalone sitcom, The Honeymooners. The show was an instant smash hit. It was filmed in front of a live audience of 1,000 people using a special technique that gave it a raw, electric energy. The audience's reactions were real, their laughter was genuine, and the show felt alive in a way no other program did. Every week, Ralph would cook up some new get-rich-quick scheme, and every week it would blow up in his face, leaving him screaming at his best friend Ed Norton or his wife Alice. And that's where the trouble started. Ralph had a signature catchphrase. When Alice would inevitably poke holes in his ridiculous plans with her sharp, sarcastic wit, Ralph would clench his fist, wave it in her direction, and bellow, "One of these days, Alice, pow, right in the kisser." Week after week, the audience roared with laughter. It was just a joke, right? A harmless expression of frustration from a man who was all bark and no bite. But the thing is, he said it a lot, and it was always a threat of physical violence against his wife. Network censors at the time were incredibly strict. They wouldn't let married couples be shown sleeping in the same bed. But for some reason, a man repeatedly threatening to strike his wife was perfectly fine. It was a bizarre double standard that everyone just accepted. The show was more popular than ever, but behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. The constant threats were starting to make some people uncomfortable. Not just viewers, but sponsors. These were the companies paying the big bucks, selling everything from soap to cigarettes, and they were terrified of being associated with anything controversial. One particular episode, the Bensonhurst bomber, took the threat to a whole new level, building the entire plot around Ralph preparing for a physical fight. The line between comedy and something much darker was getting blurry. It was a ticking time bomb, and the fuse had just been lit. The show that could do no wrong was suddenly walking a tightrope, and nobody knew it yet. It was the #1 comedy in the country, but one wrong move, one threat that felt a little too real, was all it would take to bring the whole thing crashing down. It felt like the show was invincible, but the most dangerous threat was coming from within. The official story versus the hidden truth. So with this dark cloud of controversy gathering, the show must have been canceled in disgrace, right? Ratings must have plummeted as viewers turned their backs on the troubling content. It's a great story, but it's not exactly what happened. In fact, The Honeymooners was never canceled. Not in the way we think of it today. After 39 episodes, the classic 39 as they're now known, Jackie Gleason himself pulled the plug. The show was still a massive rating success. It was a top 20 hit right up until its final episode. So why walk away from a guaranteed golden goose? The answer lies in the mind of Jackie Gleason, a man who was a notorious perfectionist. He lived in constant fear of the show's quality dipping. He once said he didn't want the characters to become household pests. It's a wild thing to wrap your head around, but Gleason believed that after 39 episodes, they had run out of original ideas for Ralph Kramden. He felt the scripts were becoming repetitive. He would rather end the show at its peak than watch it slowly fade into mediocrity. He had seen other sitcoms run for years, their jokes getting stale and their characters becoming caricatures, and he refused to let that happen to his creation. Think about that for a second. An entertainer today walking away from a top-rated show at the height of its popularity is unthinkable. But Gleason operated on a different level. He wasn't just the star, he was the creative force, and his artistic integrity was more important than the money or the fame. He decided to fold The Honeymooners back into his variety show as a series of occasional sketches. In his mind, he wasn't ending the show, he was preserving it. He was putting his masterpiece in a museum before anyone had the chance to deface it. So the idea that a single disturbing scene destroyed the show overnight is a myth. There was no massive public outcry. There was no sponsor boycott. The show didn't get forced off the air. The truth is, its biggest star was also its biggest critic, and he made the call to end it. It wasn't a scandal that ended the show, it was a rare case of artistic pride winning out over commercial success. But that doesn't mean the "pow, right in the kisser" line was harmless. The controversy was real, it just took a few more decades to truly explode. The show wasn't a failure, but a key element of it had failed, a test it didn't even know it was taking. Viewing the 50s through a modern lens. Decades passed. The Honeymooners became more than a show, it became an institution. Thanks to syndication, it was constantly on the air, discovered by new generations who fell in love with the timeless comedy. The characters were iconic. Ralph's blustering anger, Alice's patient eye-rolling, Norton's goofy charm, it was a perfect comedic formula. But as society changed, so did our understanding of what was funny. The world of the 1950s was a very different place, and a line that was once met with howls of laughter now landed with an uncomfortable silence. The "pow, right in the kisser" threat began to be seen for what it was, a depiction of threatened domestic abuse played for laughs. It's a tough pill to swallow for fans, but it's the undeniable truth. In the context of the show, Ralph never lays a hand on Alice. In fact, most episodes end with him admitting his foolishness and telling her, "Baby, you're the greatest." But the language he used, the casual way he threatened violence, is something that would never, ever make it on air today. And for good reason. You see, our understanding of the harm caused by domestic conflict has evolved dramatically. The women's rights movement and a greater public awareness of these issues completely reframed the conversation. What was once dismissed as just the way things were was now being called out as unacceptable. Critics and cultural historians began to point to the Honeymooners as a prime example of how casually our culture used to treat the idea of a man threatening his wife. It's not about canceling a classic, it's about re-examining it. It's about understanding that a piece of art can be both a product of its time and deeply flawed by modern standards. The disturbing scene wasn't one single moment. It was every single time that threat was uttered and met with laughter. The real destruction wasn't to the show's ratings in 1956, but to its untarnished legacy 50 years later. The show itself survived, but its innocence was lost forever as we started to listen more closely to what was actually being said. The show's biggest joke had become its most serious problem. Separating the art from the issues. So, here's the real mystery, the question that brings us right to today. How can a show with such a glaring, uncomfortable flaw at its very core remain one of the most beloved and influential comedies of all time? That infamous cartoonish threat, "One of these days, Alice, pow, right in the kisser," is impossible to ignore. If this central dynamic is so problematic, why do we still watch it? Why do we still laugh? It's a paradox, and it's one that maybe doesn't have an easy answer, prompting decades of debate and even some truly wild interpretations of what was really happening in that barren Brooklyn apartment. The conventional wisdom is that when you look past that awful catchphrase, you find a show with a surprising amount of heart. The reason the Honeymooners worked wasn't because of the threats, but in spite of them. It worked because the struggles of the characters were so real. Ralph wasn't a monster, he was a dreamer trapped in a dead-end job, a man whose ambition was constantly crushed by his circumstances. He lived in a tiny bare-bones apartment, the set famously lacking an icebox in favor of a simple bureau, because Jackie Gleason felt it better represented the stark bleakness of their lives. For all of Ralph's yelling, the show always made it clear that he loved Alice. She was smarter than him, stronger than him, and always brought him back down to earth. She was never a victim, and their relationship felt more real than the picture-perfect marriages on other 50s sitcoms. But for some viewers, that explanation isn't enough to reconcile the show's darkness with its comedic genius. This has given rise to some of the most enduring and fascinating fan theories in television history. The most popular of these is the purgatory theory, which posits that the Cramdens and Nortons are already dead. Their drab apartment is a limbo where they are forced to eternally relive their earthly failures. Ralph's get-rich-quick schemes are a Sisyphean punishment doomed to fail forever. His explosive anger is the torment of a soul who never achieved his dreams, while Norton's surreal detachment is his own form of spiritual stasis. They can never leave, never succeed, and never change. The comedy we see is merely the absurd tragedy of four souls trapped in a loop. Other theories push the boundaries even further. One suggests the show is set in a bleak, post-apocalyptic alternate reality where the promised post-war boom never materialized, leaving working-class citizens in a state of perpetual struggle. The stark, colorless sets aren't a creative choice, but a reflection of a world drained of hope and resources. A more meta theory claims the characters know they are on a television show. Ralph's rage is the frustration of Jackie Gleason being trapped in the role of a loudmouth buffoon, and Alice's weary eye rolls are the knowing glances of an actress who knows the script by heart. In this view, her lack of fear isn't a sign of strength, but the calm of someone who knows the threats are just empty lines she's heard 1,000 times before. Maybe the ultimate answer is that we're able to hold two ideas in our heads at once. Whether you see it as a relatable story of working-class struggle or a dark comedy about souls trapped in limbo, the core truth remains. We can acknowledge that the threats of violence are unacceptable and wrong, reflecting a mindset from a bygone era. But we can also appreciate the brilliant comedic timing, the groundbreaking performances, and the relatable story of two people trying to make it with nothing but their dreams. The existence of these wild theories proves the show's incredible depth. It's complicated, it's layered, and it reminds us that even our most cherished classics aren't perfect. And maybe that's what makes them timeless. So what do you think? Can you still enjoy a classic show like The Honeymooners while acknowledging its problematic elements? Does this change how you view the golden age of television? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into TV history.